So today we're talking about shiplap, things that you can do to your home, super simple and easy projects that you can add a ton of curb appeal to your house. Now, shiplap, if you're not familiar with it, is a really popular trend that's going on right now in the DIY space, thanks to Chip and Joanna Gaines in a big way, making that kind of rustic barn type of feel inside your very own home. And I'm gonna show you how to do it in this video. We've done it inside our home. You can make your rooms transform and look like this, to this, or this, to this. If you want to learn how, keep watching. Shiplap DIY coming up next. So my wife and I have done a few of these projects inside our home. One of them actually behind me here in our family room, and you can see how it just really transforms the space, makes it, draws attention to certain parts of your home. Now the space in question that we are going to be doing next is not here, it's actually right here, just in this eat-in kitchen area. Now we've already done a chalkboard wall for our 3-year-old son. It'll be really good for him once that fully cures in a couple of days, but I'm focused on this wall right here and the things we're going to be doing the shiplap around, that framing that you can kind of see as of right now. So this here is my space that I go ahead and do kind of all of our projects, our home projects here in the Moore household. And when it comes to your shiplap project, there's a couple of important tools you're definitely going to need and some optional tools that you may not need. You can kind of get around it if you don't have them or don't want to spend the money on certain equipment. You can kind of get around that. I'm going to tell you how to do it. But the first thing you'll probably want to have is just a plain level. This is something, especially right off the bat, that can help you get those shiplap boards hung straight. So regardless of what your wall shape might look like, or maybe there's some bows here and there, you want to make sure that the shiplap boards themselves are straight. So that's a good way to do that. When it comes to cutting the shiplap boards, there's a couple of different ways you can do it. Now, I really like my tabletop miter saw. It allows me to cut different angles. Now, when it comes to the shiplap boards, not doing 45s, mainly doing the straight angles here. But you can also do it with this circular saw too. So this is just a general circular saw you can plug in. You can take it in outside, take it anywhere you want to take it. Same with the miter saw itself. Now, if you don't have either of these power tools, you can use a handsaw. It's going to be a little bit more tedious, but you can get it done. All right, so in addition to all of that, you're definitely going to want a staple gun or a nail gun. In this case, I'm really a big fan of this battery-powered Ryobi, and you're really going to want that battery powered. If you don't have a battery powered, you have a compressor one, that's fine too. I really like the portability of this battery powered one, but you want one that's going to be able to handle the 2-inch nails in the cartridges. And speaking of those 2-inch nails, here are the ones that I use. You want to get these probably about 18 gauge brad nails, 2 inches. You want to get the 2-inch ones in length. That's really going to help you really punch through the walls and get into some of the studs here that you'll want to attach to. Of course, you want sandpaper too. I recommend some coarse grit all the way up to about 180 grit sandpaper. Anything finer than that, you're going to be having a hard time really getting into the grooves and getting rid of some of that wood. Now, finally, this is probably one of the more important tools to have. You don't need it, but it's really, really helpful. It's a jigsaw, and it's really helpful for cutting around some odd shapes and corners. For example, fixtures, light switches, outlets, things like that you're going to have to cut some different odd shapes. So that's definitely a really important tool to have. But there you have it. With these tools right here, you can pretty much get the entire job done. And we'll talk about some of the supplies next. Now, for the material that you'll need in order to create those shiplap panels, my suggestion is to do the affordable route. Now, you can spend a lot of money on some of these shiplap panels, and it can cost you hundreds of dollars just in materials alone to be able to get that shiplap look. But if you use this underlayment method, a much cheaper method, it's going to save you a lot of money in the long run. So what I'm talking about is this 5mm underlayment panel. You can get these from pretty much any big box store, and many times they will actually cut them for you in store. So that makes it a lot easier to get it home. But that's what we're looking at here. They run about $13, $14 per 4x8 foot sheet. They're great. 5mm is a great thickness. It's heavy enough to be able to withstand the 2-inch nails, but it's light enough and pliable enough that you can kind of move it around and shape it however you need to. All right, I want to talk about the total cost of this entire project, and there's two different ways to look at it. There's the starting from scratch project cost, which assumes you have no tools, assumes you have none of the materials, and you're basically starting from absolutely nothing. So this is pretty much a worst case scenario to be able to do this project in terms of from a financial perspective. But many times, most of you probably already have a few of these tools, maybe have some paint lying around that you don't need to go out and buy paint, things like that. So I'm going to talk to you about the starting from scratch project cost, and then I'll tell you what it actually cost me to finish this project. So first, let's talk about tools and the tools that you will need. So as you saw in that video, need an angle saw. The one that I use runs about $130. You can get it on Home Depot, Amazon, wherever you pretty much need to get it. But that's generally about the cheapest that it gets, is about $120, $130. But there's an alternative. You can use a hand saw if you will. Now that's going to be a little longer, a little extra work, but it's significantly cheaper. You'll also need a jigsaw, and I've been able to see these for as low as of about $50. Very easy to get one of these. Again, Home Depot, Amazon, whatever the case might be, you can get them very easily. I've had one that's been in my family for a long time. And then also you're going to need that nail gun, which you saw in the video. Those ones run about $130 for the battery powered ones. You can get an air compressor nail gun, which will probably be about $50 or $60, so a little cheaper, but you'll also need the compressor too if you didn't already have one, so just keep that in mind. And then of course you'll need a level 2. So that brings the total tool cost from a starting from scratch perspective to about $300. And then there's the material side of things, which, believe it or not, is a lot cheaper than you might think. Those underlay paneling that we talk about, that we cut into those 8-inch wide strips, or however wide you want to do it, it runs about $13 per 4x8 sheet. And again, you'll want to get those cut at the store, or you can cut them at home, depending on how your method of transportation getting that home. Then there's also sandpaper, wood filler. That'll be about $10. Caulking, painting supplies, so brushes, painter's tape, any sorts of other painting supplies, rollers, those kinds of things. That'll run you about $20. And then the paint that we use, the Behr Marquee semi-gloss paint, runs about $45 for a full can. You will definitely not use a full can on any of this stuff. So that even comes to about $90 total. So if you were starting from complete scratch, it would cost you about $390, $400. But the angle saw, the jigsaw, the nail gun, level, pretty much all of these supplies, you don't burn completely through them. In fact, the tools you're going to use, again, no doubt about it. And then all of the supplies, the materials and things, for the most part, you're going to have a lot left over when all is said and done. My total cost ended up being right around $25 in total. I had all of the tools to begin with, and then I just had to go pick up one sheet of the underlay. We were short a little bit of that. Also getting some caulking painting supplies, but that was it, about $25 to completely change how a room looks. Now for the first board that goes up, and any board you put up after that, it's really important. See these edges here? These edges are going to have some flaking and some splintering. There's one right there. You really want to clean this up, and you want to do that with your sandpaper. I've got 120 grit sandpaper here, and this is going to give me enough strength to really just cut down on these edges, make them a little softer. With the blades at your big box stores, a lot of times they're not the sharpest, so the cuts can kind of flake and splinter and things like that. So you want to keep that in mind, not only for when you hang it and choosing which side of the board looks better. If you have some flaking on the edges here or some splintering, maybe you flip over the other side and use that side instead, because you don't want that to show. But the point is, you just want to get these splinters off the best way you can, kind of on both sides of this corner, and just sand it down, make it nice and smooth right before you're about to hang your boards. Okay, so the very first board is now up, and as you can see going across here, it's really important, at least when you're initially hanging the first boards, to make sure that they are level. Now with this one, we noticed that the board itself was actually a little bit crooked. So what I did is I took my level, and all the way down this board was just checking exactly where it was level, where it wasn't. Turns out it was starting out level on one corner of the board, but by the time it got to here, it was starting to slope away from the ceiling. So I had to kind of put a little bit of force into it. Another reason why that 5mm thickness is better, because it allows you to kind of wiggle it and play with it. So from here, we're gonna put some nails in throughout the board itself. I like to put at least 2 on the ends, and then try to do 2 top and bottom at maybe 1.5 foot intervals all the way down the board itself. So now the first board is now hung, and you can see that there. Now the next step here is to bridge this gap in this distance. Now what we use, and kind of a little trick of the trade, pretty much every IKEA project or something you get together in the mail that's any furniture of any kind comes with these Allen wrenches. So we've collected a fair amount of these over the years. I always try to save them because they generally tend to be about the same sizes and I can get some overlaps. Now we think, at least in our opinion, the best kind of look is for about 1/8 inch Allen wrenches here. So what you have to do is you have to factor in this distance here. So from that corner to that edge, and then you have to subtract away the width of this, because what you're going to do is you're going to use these as spacers to give yourself that nice kind of like barn shaped look, or barn door, however barn door shiplap look you want to go for. So again, measure the distance, cut your board with this in mind. So you have to subtract maybe 1 or 2/16 away from your actual board length, whatever distance you need to cover in order to fill that gap. So now you've got the entire top panel done. One thing about these corners and these edges, don't worry about these areas, because you're going to be using some caulk to sort of clean up your messes, so to speak. So even if it gets a little rough, as you can see, it's not exactly fully straight here. You can really use some caulk to just make it look nice and finished once the whole job is all said and done. But there you go. There's our gap there. And notice my wife also painted along the bottom edge and also into these cracks some white paint, because that's the look that we're going for. We could leave that yellow paint back there behind it, but that yellow would come through in the cracks. When we have a white shiplap wall with white yellow cracks, it's going to be a little noticeable. So what we did is paint it here on the cracks. We're going to do that all the way down the wall, and then that way it gives you that nice white soft look with the shiplap boards. So after the first row of shiplap is hung, the next step is to obviously go down to the next step. Now here's my suggestion with this. If you go from one direction, let's say for example in this case we went from left to right on that top board, your next step down you should try to go the opposite direction. So go into a zigzag shape, and what that's going to do for you is actually give you the best use of your remnant boarding, so you don't waste a bunch of wood, you don't waste a bunch of boards and waste money at the end of the day. It allows that seam to naturally go where it's supposed to go, depending on how those cuts are supposed to be. So again, that zigzag shape is a good way to do that. You can plan out your seams if you have a lot of boards just in general that you can use, and it doesn't really matter if you utilize the remnant boarding or not. You can plan these out, but in my case I really wanted to utilize what we had, so that's why we did in that zigzag shape. So here's what it looks like, and of course that second row for me and for us was had that interesting cut having to go around the window frame. So that's when we had to get the jigsaw out and cut around those corners. Now I want to, again, we talked about it a second ago, using those Allen wrenches as spacers. You can use whatever you want. You don't have to use those Allen wrenches. You can use, we've used quarters in different projects, nickels, any sort of coin that is the appropriate thickness for you, or even if you have tile spacers and that works better for you, or whatever the case might be, you can use whatever works best. Just make sure they're consistent as you go from left to right. You have two of them, at least two of them, because you're also going to be needing them as you go down to the next step too, because not only are your spacing boards left to right, but your spacing boards top to bottom too. So you got to make sure you have enough of those spacers to do what you have to do. Now again, here's a look at those corners that I had to cut around. Jigsaw, your best friend here to be able to cut around that. It really does help to draw all of this out on a piece of paper to be able to sort of visualize it as you go about cutting it. From here, we started to go down the window. So these were pretty easy pieces. They were about 9 or 10 inches in width. So basically, I just had to cut the same piece over and over again, some minor differences in each one, but that was about it. So we started going down each side of the window. Very simple cuts, very simple sanding. But we notice there's something in the way on the right side. There's that light switch there, those light switches, and we're going to have to deal with that as we get a little closer to it. So here's my suggestion on this. Plan your cut for the actual hole in the wall, not for the faceplate. So what I mean by that is don't measure for where the faceplate is going to go. Measure for where the hole is if you're going to be making your cuts with the jigsaw into the shiplap paneling, because you're going to want to put your faceplate over the top of this. Here's what this should look like when it's all said and done. You should be able to pull those screws out on the top just above and below the actual switches or the outlets themselves. They can pull it away from the wall a little bit. If you're nervous about the electrical, just go turn it off that circuit in your home, and then mount the board and re-screw all of this back in to give you that nice finished look. And when that faceplate goes back over the top of it, you'll have that nice professional finished shiplap look, and you did it all yourself. So I've got a really interesting piece here. There's a lot going on. I've got a corner that I've got to deal with here going around the window frame. Part of this goes up the side of the window, and then the rest of it kind of curves around the corner and then goes along the bottom edge. On the far left side of this piece, I've got an outlet that I've got to cut out as well. Now, you're going to run into times, especially if you're doing entire walls or even entire rooms, where you're going to have to cut around outlets like this, or like light switches and things like that. Now, in this case, for this cut, it should be fairly straightforward. I can take my jigsaw in from the side here. By the way, the jigsaw is this one. I could take it in from the side and not have to worry about that. But sometimes you may find that the outlet itself is, say, in the middle of the board. So here's what you do in this situation here. A little bit of a kind of a hack, I guess, in terms of getting that done. So imagine that our light switch was, say, in the middle of the board. And if that was the case, here's my recommendation. You want to get a drill bit that's at least the width of your actual jigsaw blade itself, if not larger, to give yourself some wiggle room. And then imagine if your square that you're going to cut out is right here, you're going to pop a hole somewhere, probably in multiple holes actually, in that square itself. So what you're going to do is, what I like to do is on each corner, of course, within my square itself, you don't want to be punching a hole outside your corner. You want to make sure it's contained inside. What you're trying to do is just build yourself a big enough hole that you can stick that jigsaw blade down through, and then you can kind of work around the cuts as needed. So once your whole wall is done with the actual shiplap boards themselves, the next thing you want to do is plug the nail holes that you made. Now you can do this, it's an optional choice to do this, but if you are going to do this, it gives it a nice finished look when you go ahead and paint. What we use is this stuff. It's called plastic wood. You can get it pretty much anywhere. It's pretty cheap, only a couple bucks for a pretty big container of it. Basically, you just stick your finger in it, take a blob of it, and then kind of just put it into the holes themselves. Once you get that done, you'll want to go through and sand the whole thing. Now, as you can see, we also have some window trim here that we put up prior to putting up the shiplap, and that's also going to have to be sanded out too. So once you sand everything out, then you're ready to move on to the caulking step. All right, from here now it turns to the caulking, and remember what I was saying, you can hide a lot of your mistakes and a lot of the little bad cuts, or maybe the little parts where there was some fragmenting or flaking or splintering of the boards. Well, now's your chance to fix all that with the caulk here, and I've got this DAP caulk, which is a very common, very cheap type of caulk. This is the painter's caulk. It's a silicone-based acrylic latex caulk. You can kind of see the colors there. They are color-coded, so you can find these pretty much anywhere, Home Depot, your local hardware store, Amazon, whatever, you can find these. But you'll also want to get a caulking gun to go along with it. It'll make your life a lot easier. In fact, that's the only way you can use this type of caulking, is to use a caulking gun to go along with it. So pretty easy, but you can get both of those for fairly inexpensive online. But what you're trying to do is create seals around the edges. And again, you're trying to hide some of those mistakes. And I'm going to show you that here in just a second. So I've seen some people do caulking around all of the edges. I've seen only some of the edges, none of the edges. It really comes down to a matter of preference for you, how do you want to approach it in the long run. So as you can see, I mean, that side against that wall where it touches there's no caulk there. But as we come over to this side, and I'll just kind of dim this for you so you can see it maybe a little bit better. that is caulked all the way up. Now you're gonna get into a little bit of some tricks here, especially as you get into these areas right here, these little gaps. So my recommendation is to use a flathead screwdriver in those gaps and just try to clean that up. Also, another thing that can be really helpful for you is to use baby wipes. So if you don't have any children at home, or maybe the children are all grown up, you can get a pack of these baby wipes, again, pretty much anywhere, but this is going to give you a nice ability to really wipe down with one finger, wipe down that excess, and create a nice smooth track all the way up and down your boards. So I'm up here towards the top of the project, and there's a really good example of those mistakes I was talking about. Really, it's just, you know, minor cutting differences, but they make a big difference when it comes to just a visual perspective, especially when you start painting these shiplap panels. But here's a good example right near the top. Notice how the gap here is larger on this board than it is right here where it's flush against the wall. So that's where you'd want to put a bead of caulk all the way down to really give it that nice finished look, and actually hide those imperfections and the things and the bad cuts that may have happened. Once your caulking's finished, it's now time to start painting. And really that first coat of paint that goes on tells you everything you need to know. And really just look at that big difference it takes. And even the little guy getting in on the action here with that first coat of paint going on and the final coat coming up. All right, so here is the more or less finished product at this point. 3 coats of paint. We use the Behr Marquee semi-gloss paint, their ultra white color. It does a really good job covering. It's just a paint that we've used pretty much everywhere in the house on all of the trim, but as you can see on this project itself, looking really good. That shiplap coming in really nicely. The lines themselves are dark enough to be noticeable. When it comes to the actual seams of the actual shiplap itself. It just overall looks like a really good product, looks just really nice when it's all said and done. We did add a little bit more caulking to the edges here, along the edges, give it that nice finished look all the way down. I did the same thing on this side. Looks harder to see just because it's white on white, but yeah, so that's it. From the shiplap project on a budget, we hardly spent any more than, I think, 20, 30 bucks on this, all said and done, when it came down to just some caulking and the actual materials themselves. Now, it'll be a little bit more expensive, again, if you are doing this from scratch, don't have any of the tools. Obviously, you'll need to get some of those tools, a little bit more materials and things like that, but really, to completely transform a space, you really can't beat that. It's significantly cheaper than some of the other options out there. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks so much for watching, whatever platform you're watching this on. If you have any questions at all, you can just respond to this video, send me a message, however you see fit. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them for you. But from here on out, just decorating, adding our blinds back, doing some touch-up paint, but that's it. Here's a look at, once again, before and after. So there you go. You can see that whole project just completely transformed, the whole space. Just an area now looking much, much different than it did before. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Again, if you have any questions, you know how to find me. Thanks for watching.